Today on the podcast, we're going to be talking to Christian Originez, a director here at Coronation, and his first passion project here at Coronation, Strings of Tradition. This project focused on two brothers who make beautiful, handcrafted violins and bows. This short played at a whole bunch of film festivals and paved the way towards your feature documentary you're working on now. We're going to be talking about all of that on Heralds and Fools, so please join us. Welcome to Heralds and Fools, the podcast where we talk shop. We talk about client projects, passion projects, the nitty-gritty details of what makes creative life so fun. All right, today we're talking about Strings of Tradition, which is a piece that you made, I think, in 2023.
It's been so long. Yeah. I don't remember.
Yeah, but the audiences do. This went to 5 different film festivals. It won a film festival. It got awarded a film festival. So let's watch it, and then we'll talk.
Yeah, I feel like there's like 4 more that I signed it up for.
Maybe it got rejected.
If it got rejected, maybe I'm about to get an award.
You never know. Yeah, I think probably the window has passed.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's watch Strings of Tradition, and then we'll talk about it.
Something that I think is very interesting about classical music today is that we have a higher number of unbelievably talented and educated musicians now than we've ever had in history. My job as a fine instrument maker is to make a musician's job a lot easier, because at the end of the day, it's about the music.
It's sunnier.
Yeah,
it's
love
actually
it.
sunnier.
Yeah.
Yeah, it has more, I don't know, flavor to it somehow. Yeah.
I grew up playing violin and was very passionate about classical music. I actually remember seeing these catalogs of Antonio Stradivari's tools in his museum and his forms, and I was possessed by the idea of, continuing on that tradition. It was literally an epiphany. And I said, I want to be a violin maker.
When was the last time you watched that video?
This morning before...
And before that?
Oh, man. You probably know the feeling of just like pieces you work on where you're really proud of it in the moment you make it.
Yeah.
But then like time goes by and you totally forgot you made it.
Yeah.
So I'm not gonna say I totally forgot that I made this piece, but like it's been a while since
it's been a while.
I think the last time I watched it was when we premiered Things Visible and Invisible.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, and they opened. We opened up with Strings of Tradition. I think that was the last time I watched it.
So
like sat down and watched it.
It's been a minute.
Yeah.
Yeah, I always have the experience of like when I first make something, I'm like, this is hot garbage and it's awful and I hate it, and then I forget about it for like a couple of years, and then I go back and I say, okay. Yeah, it's not bad.
Yeah, I mean it's the curse of the filmmaker, you know,
or any artist,
especially an editor. I think especially in the art of editing.
Okay.
I think it's weird because it's like you're doing the task and it's so mundane.
Yeah.
And you're like, man, this thing sucks.
Yeah.
And then you give it some time and you watch it again. And you're like, wow, that's pretty good.
Yeah, editing is where I feel like I have the most control.
Yeah, I mean, there's actually a term. It's called the dark night of the edit.
Is that right?
Yeah,
Is that a real thing?
I'm working on another thing, as you know, and just like I want.
Well, let's talk about that other thing.
Yeah.
So you're working on a much longer documentary.
Yeah, I'm working on this piece called Kamayan. It's a documentary on Filipino food.
Yeah.
It's pretty much answering what is Filipino food and why it's important. And it's been about I'd say it's been about a 2-year process so far of filming.
Yeah, easily.
And just like now I'm like cranking open the files and like there's a lot of stuff here. And I'm nervous about if I have enough stuff or I don't have the stuff I need. And I went and like naturally I go to ChatGPT and I'm like, is it normal to feel anxious about edits? I know I have enough, and they're like, it's completely normal. It's called the dark night of the edit. So
okay?
that's what I'm calling it.
I think that Scorsese, I think it was Scorsese said something along the lines of, if you do not have an existential crisis, he might have even said, if you don't feel like killing yourself when you see your first like cut, then you're not a filmmaker.
Oh yeah, I think that's kind of how I felt during Strings of Tradition, to be honest with you, because I was so invested in trying to be an advocate for classical music, which I love so much. And I was like, I hope I do the art justice.
Yeah.
And like during the edit, and like Ryan and Aaron, they provided a lot of great lines. They gave me like beautiful music and just showed the craft, because they work really hard to make violins.
Yeah, well, let's talk about how this whole thing materialized. So we had a little bit of a tradition of our own at Coronation for a couple of years where we were making these mini documentaries about craftsmen and artisan. And so we had done Gift in My Hands, which is one that I directed, which is about Leonard Logsdale. He was a bespoke tailor, worked in the film world and in the real world. And then we did The Lion Potter. Dylan Ellicott directed that, and that was about David Young. He was a fine potter and craftsman in Gettysburg. And then we have Strings of Tradition was I'll call it the trilogy, the Coronation Craftsman trilogy.
Yeah, in
how did it all come about?
There's something about the instrument in music that like it's very much just there, you know. It's kind of like this cup, you know. No one really cares how this cup is made, but like how my mind kind of works, I'm so interested in how these things are made. Like I remember when I met my wife, she was my girlfriend at the time, we were talking about mirrors, and I was obsessed with how mirrors were made. Okay. So when it comes to music, music has kept me going. I mean, I'm a musician. In a past life I was a music director. I played classical as a child. Typical Filipino American story with parents who, you know, thrust piano lessons on me.
Were you like, I don't even know. Were you did they have Suzuki method for that?
I did Suzuki method.
I was a Suzuki kid too.
And you just bringing up the name Suzuki is like PTSD galore.
How far in Suzuki did you get? Like what book number?
Ooh, it's been a while. I got pretty far. I mean, like I was playing piano from the age of, I don't know, 8 all the way to 18.
You definitely beat me. I stopped on Suzuki method book 4 for violin.
Gosh. I didn't care about practicing at all. Yeah. And like once I turned 18, I realized, you know, like it's my life. It was my rebellious. I mean, that's the height of like my rebellion. I was like, all right, I'm quitting piano.
And what'd you play?
I just started playing guitar, and like I started playing guitar. I started playing like drums and bass. Yeah, like that's when I left like the whole classical world, and I started doing like blues and funk music.
Okay, so when did you come back to classical?
I was driving to work. I was working in Newark, New Jersey for a while. Like I was working at Rutgers campus, and I was in traffic, and I was listening to WQXR. It was just on. For the life of me, I can't remember the station, but it's probably the best classical station in the country, but it's being run out of the tri-state. I remember they were playing what's it called? the Sibelius Violin Concerto, D minor, Opus 47, I believe. And I remember how beautiful this thing was. I remember just listening to classical music, and it was very calming. It was very much like tethered me to reality. And I was like, you know what? I really love classical music. And from there, I just kept listening and listening.
Yeah.
And a good friend of mine, David Prather, who was my coworker at the time, he loved classical and jazz. And we would have these sessions where we would just listen to classical music at the office. And we would also go to the local basilica, which was like in the area, whenever they had like organ concerts.
Yeah.
Actually, before I moved to Dallas, one of my last trips living as a New Jerseyan is we went to the Met, and Alan Gilbert was on his farewell tour before he started conducting in Europe.
Yeah.
And he was doing a bunch of Sibelius. He didn't do the Sibelius violin concertos, but he was doing some Sibelius, some Mahler stuff. And like I've just been in love with classical music ever since.
So suffice it to say, you're bringing a lot of prior sort of
Yeah.
stuff. This isn't like you knew what you were getting into. You're doing your research.
Oh,
and
yeah.
You had a passion for this when you're walking into this documentary.
Yeah. So I think the selfish side, and Yvonne, who plays violin in the piece, he joked saying, "Wow, you know quite a bit about classical. I bet you're just doing this piece to listen to free classical music." I was like, I think that is part and parcel to why I'm doing this documentary.
Well, let's talk about where this location and who these guys are, Aaron and Ryan, and what they're doing. Because the location itself is also it's for violinists. It's not a luthier. Is it luthier or is
they're luthiers, yeah.
Okay. Well, it's cool too to get both of them. It's like a cool dynamic that, the violin maker and the bow maker, and it was unexpected. But that's part of that is part of documentary, right?
Yeah.
Like you have all these conceptions going in about what story you're going to tell or what story, and you have this like half vision of it's like a quarter vision of like what the story is, and then you encounter people, and life is just different than you
the story reveals itself throughout the whole process. I mean, like, you don't really get the true story until you edit it.
Because I remember when you were talking about this initially, you were like, a lot of this factory made violins are like not good. There's like this whole market for factory made violins, and the difference between a finely crafted, artisanal violin is such a thing. And that was sort of the angle there. You were talking about the gap, and it was like a bit of consumerism versus craftsman stuff. And that was like the angle you were going in on. And then you were talking to Ryan and Aaron, and you were like, how do you feel about like mass market violins? And they're like, it gets people through the door. Yeah. We like it.
I think it's one of the elements of just learning how to do documentaries of this level. Obviously, like, you could pick up a camera, do a piece, but I think a mature documentarian, and I'm just some guy, so take it at face value, but I think what ends up happening at the very beginning is that we don't do the homework, where we believe that our worldview is the absolute worldview of a piece. And you plan everything except do the research as to like what the reality is. And of course, like, you should sprinkle in your own worldview into whatever piece you make, because
you have to have a perspective.
Exactly. I mean, it's your piece, and you have a clear vision as to why you want to do this piece. But at the end of the day, it needs to also be partnered with what's actually going on. So with that whole entire thing, I went into the piece thinking, oh, it's definitely a war between handcrafted instruments and mass production, because like, Yamaha or like all these other like cheaper brands on Amazon, like even Amazon Basics has like a basic violin. Really? So it's like,
that's wild.
So it's maybe not Amazon Basics, but it's like an Amazon adjacent. It's like if I were making, violins at this level, selling them for this amount, I thought I would be, furious that these people are making it. But and like that was like the conflict I was trying to bring.
I remember.
And like when we talked about like, well, not every beginner could afford a $50,000+ violin, nor should they buy a $50,000 violin. And that's pretty much when like my conflict got smacked like in the face.
Yeah.
Just because like,
Which
oh,
seems
man.
obvious now, like when at the end, right? Of
Yeah.
the cycle. And I'm sure I'm sure there are artisanal violins that are much cheaper than that.
Sure.
But even still, like I remember, my parents buying my first violin. I'm glad they didn't spend much money
Sure.
on that. Because I was gonna be.
I mean, it's like as a filmmaker, like if you're just getting started filming, right? Your first camera should not be, an RE35.
No.
Nor
should it be anyone's, because we're a red shop. We like red.
No, we're a Nikon shop.
Yeah, we're a Nikon shop. I feel like with documentary too, you like sometimes it's like you may not even have a perspective in the story going in, but your research may have tilted you to believe that the subjects you're gonna be focusing on, their orientation towards things are different than what you expect.
Right.
And I always find it to be like sitting down with someone, having enough time to sit down with someone, having enough time to ask them the questions, helping them discover. Weirdly, sometimes it's helping them discover how they talk about a story.
Yeah.
And that's a huge thing. And it's such a freaking privilege too, to get to do some documentary stuff. I love narrative. I'm definitely more of by default, I like narrative probably better.
Sure.
Just because it's what I glom towards. But there's something about the privilege of a real person sharing their story that always feels more sacred. There's something sacred about it.
I think it, like these two brothers, for example, they clearly love doing this art that is more or less a dying art form. I mean, it's so much. It's easier going through the factory process making a violin, but they're trying to keep like the tradition of like Antonio Stradivari alive by handcrafting violins to the point where like some of their very first models were inspired by Antonio Stradivari's like actual forms. But I think one of the hard things just about documentary making is, or like if there's a regret that I had, I think that I should have spent some more time getting to know them prior to filming.
Yeah, that's a tough thing. It's a tough thing.
Yeah, and I'm not gonna. I guess I could blame it being a bit green.
Yeah.
In like the space.
You always need more time than you have too, because you can spend a lot more time. It's funny because like weirdly, the Gift in My Hands one is a documentary that we made, and people still are talking to us about.
Right.
And we shot that in like 4 hours.
Right.
And it's like, and sometimes you just catch the right moment and the right time. But sometimes like when we're doing especially shoots for like clients or something where we have to get stories out, it's always like the thought is go in advance, at least maybe even talk on Zoom in advance.
Right. Yeah.
Get to know the people, get the rhythm of conversation going, get trust established. If you can get trust established, sometimes like in like a pinch, sometimes I'll recommend, I don't know how you actually do this. If you do this, I'll recommend you do the B-roll first so that you can go and you can just like hang out with the people and do some stage stuff together, just so that you can get a rhythm of conversation, so that by the time you're sitting down, you get trust.
Yeah. I'm more of a pre-interview guy.
Yeah. Okay.
I love now I'm a pre-interview guy.
Yeah. Prior to right.
And I think one of the more difficult things about Strings of Tradition, at the time I didn't know how to separate commercial filmmaking and more or less passion project filmmaking.
So it feels a little more like an ad for them.
I felt as if I treated it a little bit more corporate than, like reflecting back on it now, sure. I feel like I treated that piece a lot more corporate than how I would treat Kamayan today. Yeah. Where it's like being okay just with experimentation. Yeah. I think one of the biggest regrets I have was allowing higher frame rates in the piece. I should have just stayed at 23 the whole entire time.
Interesting. I
think at the time I was hiding behind higher frame rates to try to fill time.
This is such a thing. This is such a thing that I do too. But it is one of the easiest hacks to get people excited about seeing something. Yeah. And for a while, every documentary piece we made at our shop was just like
slow-mo,
tip to tail. Yeah. And then you get to the end of the cycle and you're like, every single one of these things is the same.
Yeah.
It's a talking head with B-roll. And it's funny, I remember, just like on a personal basis, I remember when we watched Lord of the Rings, my dad, it was for some reason, my dad goes, yeah, everyone says this movie's the best. And the only negative thing I've ever seen is someone said like they used a little bit too much slow motion. And it's just like, noted, Dad. You know, I love slow-mo. It's funny. I'm doing a feature now, and I definitely I have a lot of high frame rate scenes.
Really? Yeah.
Oh yeah.
I think that
it's good. It's good when it's good, and if it's abused, it's bad.
It serves a purpose, and like there's a time and place. But I think looking back at it now, even like reflecting on the edit, I think the higher frame rate was a disrespect to the music.
No, that's interesting.
Just because like I think I didn't give music enough respect in the actual edit, and not.
Oh, it's tough. You also we should say your shooting window is pretty narrow. How many? Like I think you had like 2 or 3 days.
I had 2 days, 1 interview day, 1 B-roll day.
Yeah. We should say like it looks really good. It is a well-constructed thing. It won a cinematography award at a film festival. It looks good, and it feels good. But I think with more time, I could see you do more to tie the sort of natural pace of 24 to something with the music. I hear what you're saying, but I don't feel like it's as guilty of that sin as maybe you feel it is.
Yeah, I think I watching it, I probably would have done it way different today, to be honest with you. I'm proud of the piece. I love the piece. I think Aaron and Ryan were beautiful storytellers and beautiful craftsmen. But I do believe I did a disservice to the piece in my edit. And just like the shots that we got, I don't think we got enough.
Well, so let's talk about that though, because like one of the things you're doing now, like this was ostensibly your first passion project documentary short. Now you're doing a documentary feature in Kamayan.
Yeah.
What have you learned from doing that, and amidst all of your other short documentaries you've done here, as you're doing this feature? Because this is your first feature.
Yeah. Less is more. Less is a lot more. From like the setup to the actual like light source, to the actual just B-roll, less is a lot more. Yeah. Not everything needs to have the commercial narrative movie.
Well, that is certainly so. In Kamayan, the shots look beautiful, but they're also like extreme. They're much closer to reality in some of their framing and how you're seeing. It's much more like you're a fly on the wall.
Exactly.
You got some of that chef's table stuff in there, but it's not the whole thing.
No. Yeah. So a lot of it, a lot of the aesthetic differences are in the actual grade, but the actual methodology of shooting is very much. I hate the term run and gun. I really do hate the term run and gun, but it's very much run and gun.
Yeah. Why do you hate the term run and gun?
Because there's a weird negative implication that it's like on the fly.
Oh, dude, I love the term.
And I don't. I'm like, there's a world where run and gun is intentional.
Oh, dude, when I hear run and gun, it's like you're turned, like you are turned.
Right.
You're turned all the way on. You're totally in the moment.
Right.
You're reactive. You can feel it's like dancing with reality. I love that. Like that's what I think of. Which
if you define it like that, I'm totally cool with that. But like, there's this weird world where like run and gun gets this weird like reputation as a term.
Yeah, it's because I don't hear it as I hear what you're saying though, because it's like if it's like we'll get what we get, you know, we're just gonna wing it. No, I don't think that's what it is.
That's kind of like that's like
the
description of run and gun.
Yeah, with me, when I hear run and gun, I'm like, oh, run and gun is like we have our target.
Yeah,
we know what it is. We are totally focused. We're totally locked in,
right? And
we're going to follow where reality leads us to get something beautiful.
Right.
Like that's when I hear run and gun, I get excited. I'm like, all right, it's like, this is an opportunity. That's interesting.
Yeah. And I think the negative implication of run and gun is like, okay, cool, whatever. I'm just gonna get half focused because they just want me to run around with the camera.
Yeah.
But that's not,
I don't hear that.
That's not what Kamayan is. So with Kamayan, it's very much like intentional shooting at a high level, but you're working with what you got.
Right.
And that's your camera in your hand, and that's reality at hand doing its thing.
Yeah. How so? Okay, you had 2 days. You had 2 days on this. You got a 7-minute short. How many days have you had on principle for, and you're going to the Philippines soon, how many days have you had for
Kamayan? Ooh, that's a good question.
I don't even know at this
I should
point.
know this. So far, I'd probably say about a month.
Yeah, like
I'd say
a
about
month
a
worth
month,
of shoot
yeah.
days.
Because each travel day was about 4 to 5 days.
Yeah,
I'm gonna be in the Philippines for 2 weeks.
yeah,
I'd say about a month.
probably, and
month and a
that's
half,
spread
yeah.
out over
That's spread
a
out
long
over
time.
2 years. Yeah.
But there's a lot of footage. How much data is that?
Oh, that's about 45 terabytes of footage, which has been condensed to 4 terabytes of proxies.
Yeah, that's right.
So
A little different.
yeah, so there's a lot to choose from. But I think I do want to reiterate about Strings of Tradition that I am very proud of the piece.
I think you should be. It's awesome. It's a great piece, and it did sort of close out. It sort of closed out weirdly. It was like closing out a little bit of an era of Coronation too.
Yeah.
Where it was like, it feels like a lot of the stuff we're doing now is different in its DNA. It's like it's similar, but like that craftsman sort of like set. It would be interesting to do another craftsman piece, and Kamayan is a bit of that.
Right.
It's like sort of the long tail of that, because you have like this, but you're profiling the art and the love and the passion behind an entire ecosystem of food and the heritage associated with it.
And naturally, when you deal with colonial influence and like foodways, there is that natural conflict and tension between different thoughts,
which isn't in any of that sort of conflict, that implicit conflict, and the amount of story that you're dealing with is completely different.
Yeah, I think if I were to redo Strings of Tradition, I'd probably, instead of trying to focus on the actual battle between mass consumerism and handcraft art, I probably would have done the quest to imitate Stradivarius.
Yeah, right.
And I think that presents its own type of conflict.
Which you have a touch in there.
Yeah, I do, but it's almost like the conflict point could have been, are you trying to copy Stradivari, or are you going to surpass Stradivari?
Yeah.
You know, I think that's like the natural conflict of like any art form, where you're like, are you just mimicking, or are you trying to surpass?
Yeah.
And like, I think that would have, if I were to redo Strings of Tradition today, that would probably be the conflict.
Yeah, it's such a director's thing to do, is like pull up this old thing and be like, oh yeah, well here's everything that's wrong with it.
Yeah, Strings of Tradition, I think, also represents a time in my life as a filmmaker where I was more or less defining what I want to do. Mm-hmm. And without a Strings of Tradition, I wouldn't have a Kamayan, or I wouldn't have a clear footing as to what I want to do.
Yeah.
And I've been saying this in a whole bunch of pitch meetings. I always get asked the question, so why, like, how do you make documentaries or whatever? And my whole thing is I want to either expose, celebrate, or teach. Mm-hmm. And I think without Strings of Tradition and that whole process, I wouldn't have that thought process going into different things I'm doing.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I love that piece, and I love the music in that piece. I do want to mention some of the music choices for that piece.
Yeah, please do.
Because if anything, the biggest focus I had was what scores can I use, because I wasn't about to use stock.
Right.
You know, it would, if anything, that would be a huge disservice to the whole piece.
Yeah.
So originally I wanted to use that Sibelius piece as, you know, my anchor piece, but there was no licensing for it. I was ready to use like a Hilary Hahn version of Sibelius's violin concerto, but I think at the last minute I kind of got cold feet, and that's when I went to Wikicommons. And the cool thing about Wikicommons is that they had quite a few pieces from Hasha Heifetz. If you don't know who Hasha Heifetz is, he's considered one of the greatest violinists, both in play and practice.
Yeah.
Like, he practiced like an obscene number of hours a day.
Yeah.
But like, he had a whole bunch of pieces that were recorded in Europe 70 years ago, which is not protected under, you know, copyright law, so it was all public domain.
It's all public domain at this point.
So the Bach piece in G minor was up for grabs.
Yeah.
And I was going to use that, but Ivan Stefanovic, who's like the second chair associate principal for the Baltimore Symphony played it. They're like, yeah, I'm gonna go with that piece.
Yeah, right. So he just happened to be playing
it
this,
just
so he got to use it
happened,
anyway.
and I was like, this is he played enough for me to use as like a score.
Yeah.
So it was after the Sanchons, and you see the camera walking into the room. He's playing violin. He's playing that Bach.
He ran it through a couple times for us, right?
Yeah, he ran it through a couple times, which was great, just because like I needed two different versions in the edit so that I could have one that sounded far and one that sounded close.
So question, because I remember I was there on that day.
Yeah, you were the audio guy for that day.
I was, and I literally don't remember how we got audio. I remember laying down somewhere and hiding. That's about as much as I remember. And I can't remember. Did we have multiple microphones?
We had multiple microphones.
Okay.
So we had the Rode NTG.
Okay.
Still on its boom pole.
Yes.
I believe on top of stuff.
A C stand
Yvonne.
or something.
And we had one of those Rode field mics we have outside. Yeah, one of the trickiest parts was just like because of the camera, there was foot creaks.
And
because of the floorboards.
It's old building. Baltimore.
Yeah, old building. So you could hear that in the sound, but Michael Mowen, the GOAT, he removed it, and Michael Mowen did sound design and mixed it. Yeah, and he removed it. I was like, okay, great. This is awesome.
Yeah. So that, and I think we recorded on 32-bit.
We recorded on 32-bit.
Yeah.
But Michael will say 32-bit doesn't really matter.
32-bit doesn't matter if you're Mike Mowen and you're running the knobs the entire time.
Right.
But I will say, if you don't know what the heck you're doing and you want to just record in 32-bit
the way to
and
go.
then give it to a pro like Mike, he's gonna figure it out.
Yeah, he loves whenever we bring that up. Like, yeah, we're shooting 32-bit float. He's like, 32-bit float doesn't really matter.
It doesn't matter. But I don't have to think about it, and I know he'll have what he needs. Yeah, it's so annoying.
Yeah, we're all not audio gods like Michael.
No, I know, 100%.
But yeah, so the cool thing was, and I'm not trying to say that Music Bed or Artlist, the musicians
it's just
are
not.
bad.
It wasn't for this piece.
Yeah, it's just too modern recording sounding, or it was MIDI sounding.
Yeah,
and I'm not trying to.
Well, no, there's a weird thing where it's like you'd think that some of these stock libraries, and I think Universal has and we didn't have access to Universal before, and I don't even know if Universal would cover like this type of format directly, but many of these, I mean, Artlist and all this stuff, they don't have like a high amount of like classical music at all. Like it's just not.
Or
it's not
fusion,
a priority.
It's like fusion
for people.
pieces where it's
always
like
more corporate or commercial or modern.
Like you, 1 minute you're listening to a Tchaikovsky, and next you know, a drum set comes in. You're like, well, that's not what I was looking for. But yeah, a lot of the pieces were very much public domain, which worked perfectly because of the era that they were recorded. It lent credence to this whole art of creating violins. So everything sounded pretty dated. And that's what I really wanted. I really wanted it to feel like an old French piece. Where it's like, of course I had dialogue, but those French pieces like were very much like violin forward, slight pit forward. So that's what I was really going for. And like, it was awesome that this stuff was on Wiki Commons.
Well, let's just say, here's a hack if you are starting your filmmaking journey, especially in documentary space. Wiki Commons is amazing with resources and the communication of clearances. And there's a few other museums that have large, I think one of the New York Public Museums has a large amount of assets that are all public domain.
Library of Congress.
Library of Congress, and nobody goes through them. So you get rinse, wash, repeat stuff out of stock. Like you can listen, like, even like people who are tapping like Adobe stock and things like that. It's like full of AI stuff. A lot of it is like the worst stuff imaginable. I love Adobe. But it's just like but there's a rich amount of resources of things in the public domain because they are preserved for people who care about the preservation of things. There are like 12K scans of ancient paintings and artifacts and like recordings and speeches. And if you're into the employing mixed media at all, it's like, look for Wiki. We used to do a series of retreat videos and would need innumerable amounts of paintings.
Oh yeah, like the retreat guide stuff.
Yeah, for retreat guide. And it was like, we would need like between 24 and 50 pictures of like religious paintings, like specifically like biblical scenes and things like that. And it felt impossible to find the stuff until, you start learning how, and it's not just going to Wikipedia. You have to go to Wiki Commons and you have to know how to search that.
Yeah.
Okay, well, cool. Well, Christian, thank you for sitting down with us, talking through your work.
Yeah.
Flawless, effortless work that is perfect, and you have you wouldn't do anything different.
That's not true at all. Yeah. Classical music has done so much for me. So to do a piece that honors classical music meant the world to me. So when I say I there's no world in which I could do it homage, so whatever piece I have, it's going to fail into comparison to what it truly deserves, if that makes any sense.
That's every single piece of art made ever.
Yeah. So, and I think that's just being a filmmaker. I'm also not trying to sound like, oh, look at me, I'm a woman or whatever, but I think like knowing what I know now, I would love to tackle another classical piece down the road.
Yeah.
Where, I actually like do intensive research on it.
Keys of Tradition.
Keys of Tradition, the feature,
Yeah, Pipes of Tradition.
Pipes of Tradition, bagpipes.
Bagpipes of Tradition.
Yeah.
All right. Well, stay tuned for Christian's follow-up feature, Bagpipes of Tradition.
Yeah.
That'll come out when he gets around to it.
Yeah. I cannot think about another feature right now. I'm being crippled by one now.
We'll get it done, and we'll do a podcast about Kamayan when we're further along.
Yeah.
Well, you're a month in of shooting days already. Once we're deeper in post. Thank you, Christian.
You're welcome.
So if you're interested in learning more about our projects, our passion projects, our client projects, behind the scenes life here at Coronation, stay tuned to Heralds and Fools. Please. Thank you.
Yo.
All right, this is probably getting cut.
Yes.